Hi, this is Mark, and welcome to Nerdology. It's episode 39, and my very special guest today is Lindsey. Hello, Lindsey.
Hello, thank you very much for having me.
It's my pleasure, thank you. I first heard you talking on the Proctor Who podcast. They have a little sort of offshoot, which is all about Star Trek Discovery, and you were really good on that. So I thought, well, I'll be very sneaky and just ask if you fancy coming onto my podcast. And very thankfully, you said yes.
Well, that's one, very kind of you, and two, it seems to be rather how my podcast career, in inverted commas, has kind of gone. I started out, somebody was looking for somebody who was willing to talk about Broadchurch on a Doctor Who podcast. So I said yes to that, and then I came back and spoke about Doctor Who again, and then Suki from Proctor Who kind of found me and invited me to come and have a good shot with them. So yeah.
Oh, that's good. Well, maybe somebody will hear you on this podcast and drag you onto their show for something else.
Well, that's it. I'm a free agent, free for hire.
So I had a little bit of a chat with you via Twitter, and we were sort of bouncing ideas around, and you came up with like a sort of 4-page essay on what you wanted to do. Do you want to just sort of start us off there and see where we go from there?
Yeah, I suppose so. That makes me sound terribly intense, which is possibly accurate.
Or just organised, which is something we're not used to on this show, but you know.
Oh, bless. I like words, so therefore words on paper always appeal.
Mm-hmm.
So we were speaking about the things that we care about and the things that we notice, I suppose, in fandom. And I am very aware of, at the moment, of fandoms that seem to manage change well and do it regularly.
Yeah.
And those fandoms that seem to struggle a little bit more with that, and the diversity of opinion and the changes within their own fandom.
Fandoms struggling to comprehend things online?
I know. Well,
it's
online
a
certainly,
to me.
I don't think it's helped. I don't think Twitter is really making this better, which is slightly unfortunate. But it is interesting, and I find it... I like to think that I have quite a laid-back attitude about these things, that there's very little that makes me cross about what happens within a franchise. But what makes me cross is the way people respond to some of these changes.
Yes.
And, I think you and I are both on Twitter enough to realise that it's not solely fandom. It extends to all sorts of other places.
Well, if you look at the way that politics is going at the moment, there's no sort of shades of grey. You're either black or white, and that's pretty much it.
And anytime anybody tries to compromise, that just... So we'll move swiftly away from politics.
Let's not get bogged down in that.
Anybody who has the joy of having encountered me on Twitter will know that I'm about 60% politics, 40% nonsense these days.
There's nothing wrong with that.
Well, we'll see. So in any case, there are definitely some examples of fandoms that I from where I sit, deal with these things better than others. So Doctor Who, we've spoken about, is a really lovely example of where there is sort of an in-universe reason for there being a regular change.
Yes, I mean, that's beautifully set up because, back in the olden days of the 1960s, they realised that poor William Hartnell was not really going to be able to carry on for much longer, and so they had to come up with an idea of how to make a change of leading actor.
And they did it beautifully.
They did.
And the fact that as a concept has survived is wonderful.
They did have a couple of false starts along the way, though. They tried a couple of times to sort of oust him, but luckily he managed to see them off. I think he managed to get rid of 2 producers in a very quick space of time. There's a story, a 60s story. I don't know if you're aware of it, because I know you're not immersed in old Doctor Who. There's a story called the Celestial Toy Maker.
No.
It's got some slightly dodgy sort of ethnic sort of overtones these days, if you look at it. But the part of the plot that revolved around trying to dispose of William Hartnell was the baddie in the story makes him go invisible, and all you can see is this sort of disembodied hand trying to play this game that he needs to win in order to get his body back. And the idea was that when his body came back, it would be a totally different actor playing that part.
Okay.
Which could have been quite tricky if they wanted to change it again. Would they have to wheel out Michael Gough again in a slightly dodgy sort of Chinese outfit to get him to change again? Or so I think the way they figured it out was actually quite a good one in the end.
Absolutely, and it's interesting to know that that wasn't what they had originally intended, because when you stop and think about it, it's such a beautiful way of phrasing it. You know, that this is an alien for whom this is normal, for whom this is just part of everyday life, or not everyday life, but it's part of their life cycle. So that's wonderful, and that's not to say that there haven't been people who have been distraught when the Doctor has changed, or who haven't loved every iteration of the Doctor, but as a general rule, my understanding is the Doctor Who has kind of accepted that this is something that happens.
And for those of us like me who are getting on a bit and have seen this happen quite a few times, if you're not that much of a fan of the current incumbent, it's, you know, it's no big deal, because, you know, in a couple of years' time, somebody else will be coming along. So, you know, don't just chill out.
Yeah, absolutely.
Relax. Everything's going to be okay.
And I suppose, so that's very much sort of an in-universe reason for a character changing, or an actor changing who plays the character. And the other sort of side of that is maybe something like James Bond, whereby it has just become socially acceptable that Bond will be replaced, and we will continue having Bond films, but with a different iteration of Bond. And some of those changes have come with a bigger kind of universe change. So it was kind of a fairly substantial reboot when we got sort of Pierce Brosnan, and then again when we got Daniel Craig.
Well, there was a bit of an outcry about Daniel Craig, wasn't there? There was a section of fans who were absolutely livid because they couldn't ever imagine having a blonde James Bond. And what's that all about?
It's interesting, and you know, it's one of the things that I am increasingly fascinated by are where are the changes too big? What is it that is a step too far? So, for example, you know, in Doctor Who, there's been a lot of controversy over our first female Doctor.
Has there? No, I must have missed that.
And with Bond, you know, there has been some discussion that, you know, Bond could shock horror not be white, or could...
Hey, look, I was ready for Idris Elba back in the day, but I think, unfortunately, we've got to that point where he might be perhaps a little bit too long in the tooth now. I don't know.
Well, you know, to be fair, I thought Daniel Craig was a little on the mature side when they cast him, but he's done a remarkable job. So, you know.
He has. He's been brilliant.
But equally, it's a question of... So for me, it comes down to what is the most important thing about the character? What is core to that character? If somebody asked me to describe the 5 most important things about either James Bond or Doctor Who, I don't know that their gender or the colour of their skin would be in those top 5. But, you know, for some people that's clearly important. And, you know, we've said before that, you know, if it's not your favourite iteration, that's one thing. But about how you then choose to talk about it is really difficult.
I guess it's harder if you're a Bond fan, because obviously it's a film franchise, and it takes a lot longer to make a movie than it does to churn out a TV series. So I guess, you know, you're limited to a smaller number of stories, and you're having to wait that bit longer for that change to occur. True,
but equally, if the Bond that is currently on the screen is not your favourite, it does nothing to devalue the rest of the franchise.
Well, that's it. That's the other thing. Like, going back to Doctor Who, you know, when people have perhaps not been happy with one or another person coming in, you know, we are now at the point where we've got the best part of 55 years worth of stories that you can go back and enjoy. You can explore, you know, perhaps an older Doctor that you might not have seen before, and perhaps get something from that if you're not getting anything from the current setup.
Yeah, and, you know, for me, a lot of it also comes down to, you know, what is the intention? What was the intention of the person who was doing the work, who was creating this? You know, there are definitely some places where you're like, well, somebody's clearly out to make money. And I might cite the Disney live action franchise.
I can't believe you'd say
I
that.
know, shocking. Disney are out to make money. Who would have believed it?
I know.
But equally...
it doesn't make me angry, because, like you said, I think it takes quite a lot to really make you angry, but it just seems utterly pointless, really, apart from, you know, just getting that money in the bank.
Yeah.
The new Aladdin, I've seen trailers for that, and I'm just thinking, well... You know, the old one was pretty good.
But, you know, interestingly, because Aladdin was on the list of the ones that I was outraged by. So The Lion King is, and again, we haven't seen it yet, but The Lion King I look at and I go, but they're not live action lions. They're CGI. They're just CGI.
Yeah.
And I believe that there's all sorts of controversy over the fact that they have literally taken the animators' work from the originals and kind of recreated it frame by frame.
Oh, really?
And there's no credit going to the work that was done by those original animators.
Yeah, that's not cool, is it, really?
Really.
If that's what they've done.
Indeed.
But, you know.
But on the other side of that, in Aladdin, what I'm now hearing is that actually, you know, it's silly things like there were quite a lot of quite white people in Aladdin, given where the story was set, and they've they've rectified that. And, you know, Jasmine has been given her own song and a bit more of her own motivation.
I did hear that in a review, and they said it's a bit more, you know, she's more in control of her own sort of destiny rather than just, you know, being the damsel in distress.
So perhaps there's a little bit more value in that, and that's something that and again, you're right, like my original reaction to that was like, what are you doing? But it is interesting, and so where that line sits and what we accept and what we respond to and how we respond to it it keeps coming back through in my kind of observing of what's going on. But you know, we need to be frank that I don't always respond well, and certainly when I was slightly younger I responded very poorly to some things.
Come on, you can't just say that. You have to give us an example.
Okay, so I
put you on the spot.
I have been a massive Sherlock Holmes fan since I was a very small child. I say very small.
Oh, right.
I was like under 10, I think, when I was first introduced to Sherlock Holmes. And I was given an audio book with some radio dramatisations by the BBC.
Oh, fantastic.
And they're just fabulous. And, you know, I've read all the books. I love it. And at various stages I've kind of discovered iterations. So I was introduced to the BBC radio stuff really early on, so that's kind of...
Is that Clive Merrison?
Yeah, and they've recorded everything, and it's beautiful. And even as an adult, I go back to those and I listen to those quite a lot. And I've discovered the Granada TV adaptations with Jeremy Brett.
I suppose it's because of the age I am.
Just wonderful.
He's so good.
And there's something so British about the 1980s iteration of Victorian London. I love it.
Yeah.
So these things are things that I'm very fond of. They mean a lot to me. You know, I have a link. So I'm from Edinburgh, so there's like an Arthur Conan Doyle thing going on.
Sure. Yeah.
And so sometimes, sort of over the last 10 or 15 years, there have been some interesting adaptations appeared. So it should be noted that when Sherlock was first slated, I was super excited because for me there was such a clear love for the material. Like right from the start, Stephen Moffat and Mark Gatiss, like they just clearly loved it. And there had been lots of changes made, but it was being done with respect for the original, with a real understanding of the characters. Whereas Guy Ritchie's Sherlock Holmes film, even now it makes me not angry, but maybe slightly cross. Because I'm like, call it James Bond in the Victorian era, call it something.
I mean, I enjoy them on their own terms, but they're not.
They're fine. And you know, as an adult, I have now watched them both and kind of gone, right, okay, they're not great, but you know what? It doesn't stop there being value in the original source material. Elementary is another really good example of that. You know, there's a bit of me that goes, right, so an American TV show saw that Sherlock had done really well and went, oh, let's make an American version of it. And it's interesting. So, to be brutally frank, things that don't upset me, I don't care that Lucy Liu is playing Watson. That doesn't bother me at all. Yeah. But what bothers me is the fact that the core behaviour of the character seems to have shifted so much. And again, you know, I've now watched a little bit more of that because I got about halfway through the first episode and switched off. I've gone back and I've revisited it. Indeed. A bit more calmly. And actually there is a value to it. And again, maybe I would prefer if they hadn't like been so literal and they're like, this is Sherlock Holmes set in America. Because things like House are also wonderful, where there's lots of understated reference to the source material. But that's definitely been a journey for me. There was a while there where I was very, very cross about this.
I feel like you've grown as a person. It sounds like you're really, you're learning to control your feelings, and you've worked it out.
Indeed, I will rage. I still rage a lot. I think I was listening to an episode from a little while ago where you had a body on who was very, very cross about. Was it Twice Upon a Time?
Oh yeah, that's
Bless Ben.
Yeah, he gets very passionate.
But I understand his passion. It's like I didn't necessarily have quite the same reaction, but I absolutely understood that level of. And at no point was he rude or obnoxious about the intention behind it. And I think for me that's where like you can be passionate and you can care and you can argue that something isn't right, but it's about how we do that. So what about you? Have you had anything where you have just about crossed the cross the Rubicon and never come back?
I think going back to Doctor Who, back when I used to do the old Blue Box podcast, it would get raised from time to time about, what do you think the idea about having a woman Doctor Who? And I'll admit, back in the day, I was a bit reticent, thinking, well, maybe I'm just old-fashioned, a bit of tradition. I just thought, well, I just like it being a male character. I don't, why can't we have like a really strong new female character that doesn't have to necessarily be the Doctor? But that said, when they announced Jodie Whittaker, I got really super excited. It just really enthused me, and I felt like it was going to give the whole series a whole sort of fresh new look, and a different sort of ethos, because I love Peter Capaldi, and obviously being a Scot, I'm guessing you might be a bit of a fan.
I would like to think I'd be a fan either way, but yes, it's been fun.
Yeah.
It's two Scottish Doctors, only one of them sounded Scottish, but we'll move to it later on.
Well, yeah. No, he is an amazing actor, and whoever's going to follow him was always going to be slightly up against it. But I think, I don't know, I really like Jodie Whittaker. I've seen her in other things before, Broadchurch, and I've forgotten the name of it now. The one where she fakes the ID of she's a nurse and she fakes the idea of a doctor and pretends to be a doctor. It was a BBC drama. It was really good. I forget what it's called now. I have to Google it sometime. She was really good in that. But I felt like her first series, I don't really have a problem with her. I think she's great, but I'm not sure the character has quite hit the ground yet. Maybe that's like a slow burn that they're working their way up to, but I didn't feel like there were too many sort of, I am the Doctor moments. But then again, maybe she doesn't have to prove herself like, most guys, maybe she's already, cool with who she is. I don't know.
But again, the way that you're stating that is in a positive light. And for me, you know what, she's not probably my favourite Doctor yet. And this season has had, the last season had some amazing episodes in it. Like, nobody could argue.
Yeah. I love the historical.
Yeah, I was about to say, nobody could argue that Rosa or Demons of the Punjab was not important television.
No, they were excellent.
But I agree that there were problems. But I think for me, it felt very much like the problems maybe came from expectation, but more came from the kind of overarching control, so perhaps from Chris Chibnall as opposed to the Doctor. And this is where, again, I don't know that the Twitter sphere really helps with this, that there's the way that you choose to frame that argument, to say that even if Jodie Whittaker's Doctor is not your favourite Doctor, that's absolutely fine. Even if you actively dislike it, even if you're never going to watch any more of her in it, even if you would like her to be replaced, that is all fine. To say that we have now had a female Doctor, and to say that that doesn't work, and that you just want it to go back to being a man, that's where I have a problem. Because that falls into that awful trap of saying, well, we tried this one thing and this one thing didn't work, so let's go back to the other 12 iterations that we've had. And for me, that feels like it comes from a different place. And it's something that we need to test, because we all say things and we all have stray thoughts that are perhaps less than gracious or come from a place of inbuilt.
But I think most of us have that sort of self-awareness to think, well, actually, no, Mark, you're being a bit of an idiot there, or, just wait and see what happens and you might actually change your mind.
Yeah, and it's about stopping and questioning that. And so one of the things that I think is really important is seeking out voices that you're perhaps not hearing about it. So, I had feelings about when I have a concern about something, I try and find a voice that is more experienced in that area. So, like, as a woman, I have certain opinions on things, and that doesn't mean that every woman is going to agree with me, but I come at it from perhaps a slightly different place. But I am not of an ethnic minority. I don't have a disability. I'm cisgendered and straight.
Sure.
There are lots of people who have experiences that are very different from mine. And I consciously try and see if I can seek out somebody who can kind of educate me. And it doesn't mean I agree with everything that I hear, but it does mean...
No, but it's giving you a more balanced
hopefully,
view,
it's giving me the opportunity to learn more and to develop, because I think that's really important.
And there is a danger as well with social media that you can get yourself into a sort of protective bubble of people who only share the same views
Absolutely.
as you, which, you know, the phrase echo chamber gets
It
used
does,
a lot.
and I think fandom is really bad for that. And I think we often find ourselves sitting on one side of a divide or another, and it's not helpful or healthy. And it's very easy to say this as somebody who comes from, as a general rule, not a minority. But, you know, I actively listen to podcasts where I disagree with people. Proctor Who might be a good example. And the guys who run that will know that I have been known to call them out, because I think it's really important that you do. When I accepted Suki's invitation to come and speak on the Discovery Log podcast, I had a conversation with myself about what I would or would not tolerate in that environment. And the guys are lovely, like, don't get me wrong, in that case there was absolutely nothing untoward there. But there are some people who are associated with that podcast who have opinions that I actively disagree with. But I think it's really important that we try and do that, and we try and call each other out in as civil as manner as we can manage.
Yeah, that's it.
And I slip too. I am not a white horse, I'm not a charger. No, I'm not a charger on a white steed, or whatever the appropriate turn of phrase is.
Yeah, I think we all have things that we get very passionate about, and sometimes that can spill over and just, you know, you may not necessarily, you know, mean to come across in a bad way, but it can just kind of come over that way to someone who's listening perhaps from the other side of the debate, possibly.
It is, and we see it all the time, and there are, you know, pretty much every day there are little eruptions within certain fandoms about people who have said certain things, or groups of fans who are taking sides with one person or another. And again, it comes back to how we choose to talk to each other and how we go about it. So I've said that I think it's really important to seek out voices from minorities. I think it's also really important for us not to speak for them. I think as soon as we start doing that, it gets very messy. You know, I can stand up and say, as a woman, I feel this way. I detest nothing more than being told what I feel as a woman, particularly by other women. Or like, women don't want this. Well, some of them maybe do.
Yeah, thanks for speaking for us all.
Absolutely nothing like homogenising a group, is there? And, you know, we speak...
Because you're all the same, obviously.
But we speak about mansplaining, and it is an awful thing that does happen. But...
I think you've got that wrong, actually, Lindsay.
Oh, sorry. Apologies, clearly.
No, it's okay, as long as, it's fine.
But, you know, equally, there's you know, white person splaining, there's cis splaining. You know, we sometimes think that we know best. Even if we're trying to be an ally, that doesn't always come across the way that we would intend it to. And I think sometimes when we try to play the protector, and even with the best of intentions, we sometimes end up getting ourselves in bigger trouble, because we're all human and we all say things that are perhaps slightly less well thought out than they could be, or that people take to mean things that we haven't intended. And you get yourself into all sorts of trouble that way. And it's so easily done, but we need to try and avoid making assumptions about somebody, and also saying things without thinking them through. I think both of those things are equally challenging.
It's so nice to hear a voice of reason and just talking about this. It's amazing.
Well, bless. There's talking sense, and then you go to my Twitter feed and you see me getting very cross at people who...
Oh, well, yeah.
But, you know, I don't like being told I'm not Scottish because I come from Edinburgh. I don't like being told that I want independence because we have a majority SNP government. I don't like being told what I think as a woman, or what I should or should not feel about something that a person doesn't necessarily have a better placed view on than mine. So I will stand up and argue with you if you tell me what I think. However,
Scots people arguing.
I know. To be fair, that's possibly one of my favourite Doctor Who moments of all time. He's like, I'm Scottish, I can be cross. Oh dear. It's one of our better traits, so I'm sure you would agree.
Yeah.
So it is interesting, and I think if we take it back to fandom and about the changes that we struggle with, I like to set myself on my high horse about Sherlock Holmes now, but there are various other things that I look at and go, oh, they're probably going to remake this, aren't they? And it's about taking the time to kind of stop and breathe, because, you know, I'm a massive Harry Potter fan, massive.
Oh, okay.
It was one of my first loves and probably one of my first kind of proper obsessions.
I feel I know where you're going with this particular strand, yeah.
Well, you know what? It's interesting because it is inevitable. They're going to remake it at some point in the future. And even what we're getting now in terms of what's it called? Fantastic Beasts. There are various changes that are kind of being worked through. And on some level, there are bits of it that I go, okay, well, I have to trust that J.K. Rowling created these characters and she cares for them. Now, I might not agree with what she's choosing to do or to change, but, she has a right to them. We certainly don't own them more than she does, no matter how attached we may be to them. But, there are some bits, for example, there are some films that are atrocious and miss some of my favourite bits. And maybe if they were to remake them, they would include those favourite bits. And that would be great. And while nobody will ever be McGonagall in the way that Maggie Smith is McGonagall or Alan Rickman is Snape.
Quality, isn't
well,
she?
This is it. Like, both Alan Rickman and Maggie Smith are my all-time favourites. But, you know what? Maybe somebody else could bring a different something. And nothing will degrade their performances or their legacy or their kind of imagery. So, I'm kind of, if it does happen, I would like to go and sit with an open mind. But we'll see. There was I don't know, have you seen the most recent Fantastic Beasts
I'll be honest,
film?
I haven't seen either of them.
Shocking and appalling.
I know. My wife's a big fan of, J.K. Rowling as a whole, but particularly Harry Potter. And she hasn't seen them either, as far as I'm aware. We don't get out to the cinema as often as we used to, so we ought to really remedy that, and perhaps, because I'm guessing they're probably, well, certainly the first one will be out.
Oh, absolutely, I think so. The first one I would say is probably better than the second, but the second one brings back some lovely kind of musical themes and things that just take you straight back, and that's a wonderful thing. I won't say too much, but there is a character who reappears in the second film, and logically they shouldn't be there. And I'm like, right, okay, JK, right, okay. I'm giving you the benefit of the doubt for the time being, but...
A bit of headcanoning going on.
Well, given how much information she has given us about certain peripheral characters, and we can talk another time about how much I love a good background character. But yeah, so she's built those background characters really well, and we know quite a lot about some of them. And then for one of them to appear in this film, and you go, well, you're not even supposed to be born yet, really. This is weird. So in any case, it will be interesting to see how she takes that, but I'm trying very hard to wait and give her the benefit of the doubt until we get a little more detail. I'm sure there was a reason for it, I'm sure.
Well, how many are they planning to make of the Fantastic Beasts? Is it like a trilogy, or have they got more
I think
planned,
it might be
5.
You know?
Oh, okay. So there's space there to sort of fill in
and
gaps
if she's done it for a reason, if that character is then going to go on to have a really important role to play, or she's going to manage to fix is not the right word, but if she's going to manage to kind of correct some of our previous misconceptions, that would be interesting.
Yeah. I must admit, I have to go and search that out, because I've seen the trailers and stuff, and it looks really good.
Yeah, they're not life-changing, I don't think, but I do enjoy them.
I mean, we were talking about successful franchises during our little Twitter exchange, and we were talking about what could have been in certain franchises. So I think one of the things I remember cropping up in the conversations, I think we're both quite fond of the Lord of the Rings.
Love them.
Yeah. Me personally, not so much the Hobbit films.
Agreed.
Yeah. And just how different they might have been, because originally Guillermo del Toro was penciled in to direct the Hobbit films, and then through various reasons outside of his control, it ended up reverting back to Peter Jackson. Yeah,
and I think, so again, my association with those is quite long. My dad read us The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings when we were very little. So good on him. He read them to me, and then he read them to my little sister 4 years later.
Wow. That's hardcore.
It is. It's a bit of an epic. So therefore, I'm very fond of them. And I think I kind of went into the films fairly open-minded, and was totally blown away. Like, the Lord of the Rings films are as close to a perfect creation of something of that ilk as I think you're going to get.
They're so faithful, aren't they? And particularly,
they are.
For uber nerds like myself, who my history with those books. Our teacher in our final class of primary school read us The Hobbit over a series of lessons, and I had the sort of all-in-one hardback of Lord of the Rings. I think it was the 50th? No, it can't have been the 50th. I don't know. Anyway, it was like an anniversary edition that came out, and I would read that every Christmas, because when I first left school, I was in a job where the whole place would shut down for a couple of weeks, so I just immersed myself in that, reading that for that space of time. And I think the love and care that they put into making those Lord of the Rings films was just immense.
It was, and there are definitely challenges there, as in it's a very male-dominated story, but that's not Peter Jackson's fault. That's what J.R.R. Tolkien wrote. And, you know, there have been conversations more recently about the fact that it's also a very white story, which is true. You sit there and go, okay, no, you're absolutely correct. There are several species, all of which are entirely Caucasian. And at the time I didn't notice that. And part of that is being in a blessed position whereby it's not something that I look out for. But that said, they're beautiful films. They're just stunning. The Hobbit, I knew as soon as it was 3 films we were going to be in trouble, because let's face it, The Hobbit is shorter significantly than The Lord of the Rings. It didn't need 3 films. There was a lot of random stuff shoved in there, and I know a lot of it came from elsewhere in the canon. It came from the Silmarillion or places like that. But yeah, it wasn't ideal, I don't think.
No, I was surprised when they announced it was going to be 2 films, frankly, for the Hobbit when they first said, and then when they said it was going to be 3, I was just really, that's when alarm bells started ringing for me. Really, it just didn't seem, I don't know. But
that said, I think, so despite my frustrations, like, I have no doubt that Peter Jackson set out to make a good film or a good series of films. He did it with love. He clearly loves the material. He clearly is passionate about what he can do. And while the end result isn't perfect, I'm kind of glad it was him that did it. Like, I think if we'd had The Hobbit by, I'm going to try and say his name and fail, Guillermo del Toro, I think if we'd had that, it wouldn't have felt like it came from the same world.
No.
And that...
He has a very distinct look to his films.
He does, and that's not bad.
I think it would have married quite nicely with the way that Peter Jackson works. Have you seen much of Guillermo del Toro's work?
I've seen a couple of things. I saw Pan's Labyrinth, which...
Yeah, that's a really great... Well, I liked it. Yeah.
It's not my favourite. But again, maybe I was just too young and too naive at the time. Like, I haven't revisited anything recently. And I've seen The Shape of Water, which is wonderful.
Right. Some of the real world stuff in Pan's Labyrinth is pretty hard going, but the fantastical element is amazing.
Yeah.
Really beautifully done.
And I think, and again, this is one of those interesting where fandoms kind of collide moment, that I love bits of sci-fi and I love bits of fantasy, but there are areas that I struggle with a little bit more.
Yeah.
And so we've spoken about the fact that I am not a huge Star Wars fan, but that doesn't mean that I don't enjoy other people's enjoyment of it. So I work in a kind of geeky environment where we all love Marvel and Star Wars and Star Trek and all of that kind of nonsense. But you know, it means that I'm happily going to cover the shift on the release dates of the Star Wars films so they can all go see it at midnight. And then we have to, fight it out for Marvel releases. But yeah, so some of those things are not perhaps in my wheelhouse as much as they are with other sci-fi and fantasy fans. But that's okay. That's okay. I think it's interesting because I'm also aware that I believe Amazon Prime are doing a Lord of the Rings thing.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a kind of it's going to be set in the Second Age, so that's before what happens in the Lord of the Rings movies. So that's going to be a new take on. I think I may have heard somewhere that they've got someone from Game of Thrones involved in the making of it. I don't think they're going to go quite to Game of Thrones levels of debauchery and incest and stuff.
Well, those elves, you never know.
Well, yeah, they are a funny bunch. I think I don't know. I'll wait and see rather than prejudging it. I'll wait and see. I'm hoping it's going to be good. Time will tell whether it will or not.
Yeah, and I think
they're putting a lot of money into it, so obviously they want it to work.
Absolutely, and I think again it comes back to that point of, well, you know what? Even if it's not like the Lord of the Rings films they're going to be there for a while. You know, we might not enjoy The Hobbit, but that doesn't detract from the value of the Lord of the Rings films, and I think
No, absolutely.
we need to be better at saying that. So kind of overshadowing all of this, and we kind of have only just kind of touched on it, is the challenge of Star Trek, because of all the communities that I am involved with, it is by far the most kind of aggressively cliquey.
Really?
And I really struggle with that, because it's just not how I see or understand what the ideals behind it are.
I do get a bit of that from, because my comfort zone is Doctor Who. I love Star Trek, but I think I definitely class myself as a casual fan rather than someone who's you know really hardened, someone who's an aficionado perhaps. And there is a degree of that kind of, I think the phrase that gets used is gatekeeping in Doctor Who to a degree, but maybe I just only really mix with nice people online, but I don't tend to see that quite so much.
Yeah, and I'm sure they exist, and there was a lot of vitriol about the 13th Doctor. So
yeah, you're not wrong there.
It's not that any of these other fandoms are free from it, but I find it. There's a small minority who need to be obtusely rude about a bit of the franchise they don't enjoy. But even within the open and accepting kind of side of it, it does get very much us and them.
Really?
And I don't think that most people intend it to be that way, but it does come back down to the way that we talk about it and the way that we discuss it. And there are lines. So there is just no need for anybody to be tagging creators and going off on one. And I'm like, well, clearly they didn't set out to ruin your childhood, so could we just rein it back in, please? Or the infantile need to refer to a bit of the franchise by the acronym STD. And I'm just like, and they're like, oh, well, it's just following the pattern. No, it's not. We don't call it STTNG. We don't call it STVOY. Like, can we just not?
Everyone knows
or
it's
DSC,
disco.
Or precisely. And it's clearly they're setting out to antagonise and to enrage people. And, it comes with, well, anybody who enjoys this is also of whatever. And it's just unnecessary. And it's so... Yeah. I'm loath to refer to Roddenberry's vision, because I don't like. We sometimes forget that Gene Roddenberry was in it for the money as much as anybody else, and we've changed. And what Star Trek is and what Star Trek means has changed. But this vitriolic kind of attitude or this antagonistic approach is nothing. Like, Discovery is not my favourite Star Trek, and there are plenty of problems with it. But you know what? It's only on season 2, and it's been brought back, and that's a good thing. Like, it's not perfect, but you know what? Neither is TNG or Voyager, and the original series has got its own shelf of problems. I love the fact that the original series exists, because we wouldn't have the rest of the franchise without it. And they did some incredible things at the time, but it's not my favourite Star Trek. It's not, inverted commas, my Star Trek. But that doesn't mean that people shouldn't enjoy it, or that I'm going to antagonise anybody who does. But we just aren't good with that line. We just aren't. However, we could all be better, I think. We could all be better. And sometimes you just have to ignore the trolls, because you're never going to change their mind. But
no, that's true. The phrase is "don't feed the trolls." So just
But sometimes a good argument is just so much fun. And again, that comes from a place where I would only do that when I felt emotionally or mentally in the right place to do that. And I will occasionally engage on my own terms. And I take a strange pleasure in being the last one to respond. But no,
it can get quite nasty.
It can, and it gets very personal, and that's not helpful at all.
No. You get people piling on, and it gets a bit...
and it happens in both directions.
It crosses a line,
I think.
Doesn't it?
We all like to jump in and defend our friends, and it's difficult because you can love somebody and you can be very close to them and you can be their friend without agreeing with them 100% of the time. And sometimes we all get it wrong, and this is true in politics, and it's true in real life, and it's true in fandom, that sorry is sometimes all you can say, but it's not always enough. And sometimes people just don't want to hear it. So there is no silver bullet, I don't think, but it would do us all good, I think, to think a little harder and speak a little less sometimes.
Amen to that. Now I'm going to rewind a bit. You mentioned earlier about something you particularly enjoy when you're watching TV shows is really well written secondary characters that sort of come along just for that particular story. Yeah. And do you have any particular ones that really stand out, you feel really emphasise that?
Yeah, I suppose so. When I say secondary characters, what I suppose I mean are the kind of peripheral continuing characters. So people who appear and who are not the focus and are never going to be the focus, but they bring me a strange kind of joy. So a classic example of that would be in Harry Potter. McGonagall is by far my favourite character and probably has a total of maybe 20 pages in the entire 7 books. Maybe a little bit more than that. But she is absolutely a peripheral character. Like, I'm not particularly bothered by Harry, Ron or Hermione. But for me, the value in a well-written story is that even those peripheral characters are given depth and care, and you believe that they're people. Or even in Sherlock, I love Mycroft. Mycroft is my favourite. So again, clearly not the primary character by any stretch. But those are kind of where I often find my affection kind of sticking.
Well, I like sorry to interrupt. In old Doctor Who, you'd have like a story that would go on for like maybe 4 to 6 weeks perhaps, and you'd have like an ensemble cast for that particular story. And there've been some great ones over the years. One that really stands out for me, I don't know if it's one that you've seen. It's a Tom Baker story called The Stones of Blood.
Yes, I have.
And there's a character in that, and she is fantastic. Oh God, her name is just.
Is it the Professor?
I was thinking about it this morning. Yeah, the
She's
Professor.
excellent, isn't she?
What's she called?
I honestly can't remember.
Brain's gone blank. How annoying! Hang on a minute. I can just edit this out. Googles.
No, surely not. Let's be honest and open about it.
What? No. I was literally Amelia Rumford. That's dear. It. Amelia Rumford. It's before I got Chrome up, but I didn't even have to open it up. And she is played by an actress. I am going to look her up because she apparently was quite the star back in the day.
I love that though, and I love the fact that we seem to be in a bit of an era where this is happening a bit more often, because obviously was recorded some time ago, but I love the number of mature actresses who are still getting given roles and for whom there is still interesting things happening.
So she's played by an actor called Beatrix Lehman. And she'd been in quite a lot of high-profile stuff back in the day. And I think this might have been one of her last roles. But I think Tom Baker at that point was not the easiest of characters to get along with. He could be quite prickly, shall we say. But they just fell in love with each other as soon as they met. And I think it was almost like a contest to see who could be the most bonkers and out there. And I think she gives him a really good run for his money. But,
I love it when that happens though, and I think sometimes actors, like, things bring out the best in each other, and you see that, and it's just wonderful. We're kind of privileged to get an insight into some of these things sometimes. We were speaking about Lord of the Rings earlier. Elrond, I don't know if you know who Elrond is. Well, presumably.
Oh yes, it's Chappie from The Matrix.
Yes, it's played by Hugo Weaving in the film. But Elrond is like my favourite character.
Right, okay.
And that's even in the books, that's pretty extreme left field.
It is a bit.
And he's got twin sons, and he was a twin, and his twin chose to be a human and died, and it's a whole big thing. And I love that. Like, I love it. And So one of the bits of fandom that I quite enjoy is I do love a bit of fanfic.
Oh, right. I've never really delved into that. But
it's an interesting
I believe
place.
It goes far and wide.
It does. And some of it's wonderful. Some of it, you look at some of the official publications from either, Doctor Who or Torchwood or Star Trek, and you go, I've read better fanfic. Not naming any names. But equally, some of it's horrific and awful and shocking.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
you got to look for the diamonds in the rough.
Absolutely. And unfortunately, there's less editing to get rid of the rough in the world of fanfic. But for me, again, a good character is somebody who is inspired, who we have enough of, that there is something there that fandom can kind of build around or work around and kind of create in relation to. And that can be really interesting as well. And even if it's... So I've learned over the years that there are often, concepts where you're like, why would you do this? Oh, this is an AU set in the future where actually this person's a vampire and this person's like a werewolf killer. And you're like, okay. And occasionally you read the first chapter and you're like, But I have now often enough been so taken aback with the care that somebody has taken to maintain the integral value of the character, even in a slightly ridiculous situation, that you can totally buy in. Now, that doesn't always happen by any stretch of the imagination, and there are certain things that I don't touch. Like, I have no interest in these people running pizza parlours, or, there's really weird trends that you find, like, everybody's doing this, and everybody's then doing that, or,
Okay.
Don't ask me why. I have no idea where these things come from, somewhere.
I feel like I've led a very sheltered life now.
Oh, and this is only the decent tip of the iceberg that I'm sharing with you.
I've heard there's some... more specialist stuff out there.
And
let's not go down that particular rabbit hole.
But for me, that's maybe helped kind of solidify what it is that I think is important in a character. Actually, if we're talking about Sherlock, what is it about Sherlock that transcends where he lives or the time and era in which he lives? Like, what is it about this character that makes them still this character, even if they've got a different profession or they live in a different era? Like, those are the things that matter.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's a good opportunity to stop and go, interesting. I would never have thought about that, but
Have you been inspired to make your own?
I have been known to pen the odd thing. No. Some of it better than others.
For perusal, or is it something you just do for your own pleasure?
No, I have been known to share one or two odd things. I'm sure those who are interested in such things can find me. And I think I don't know where that sentence was going. It was going down a rabbit hole one way or the other. Yeah, but no, I. So speaking about why it is we need to, or what that core value of the character. I kind of, my nerdiness kind of truly developed. So a combination of Harry Potter and Star Trek in my formative years. And I came across Voyager Voyager was released in the UK at just the right time for me. I'd seen some TNG, I had seen the odd episode of the original series or maybe the odd movie. But Voyager just totally captured my imagination. But it was being shown at the same time as DS9, which I just didn't really enjoy that much. And neither of my parents are very nerdy, and I certainly wasn't encouraged to go to cons and things, and without the internet being the crazy way that it is today, I just, at no point was it ever kind of drilled into me that I must love it all.
Well, that's and that's probably quite a healthy place to be at, really, I think.
Well, I think it's something that we've kind of lost in some ways. Like, we're not so good at... Like, there's an expectation now that, if you like Doctor Who, you must like it all, or you're only, like, a half fan, or if you only, or if you don't enjoy this type of Star Trek.
Well, unless you've watched all the episodes in chronological order.
Absolutely, back to front 3 times over. But, we're all different, and for some people...
That said, I really do want to do that, but, that's an aside.
Oh, absolutely. Like, don't get me wrong. Like, there are, like, I have many feelings about people who claim to like Harry Potter and have never read the books. Feelings, strong feelings. But you know what? If they enjoy it, they enjoy it. And if they don't get as much out of them or out of the story as they could if they had read the books as well. That's kind of just a thing. And about how we talk about that. So one of the things I love about Doctor Who is that I've said to you before that I haven't seen most of the original stuff.
Yeah.
But if there are places where, you know, I can go and listen to people talk enthusiastically about, oh, and there was this thing that was a reference to that episode, and that's so lovely, and, you know, oh, and did you see this picture of that person? And you're like, okay, I didn't know that, but you've shared that with me, and you've shared it with joy, and you haven't criticised me for not having spotted it. I think that is so key.
Yeah, I think one of my podcasts that I used to subscribe to a lot, which perhaps doesn't put out episodes too often these days, is called Mostly Harmless Cutaway.
Okay.
It's the main guy behind that is someone called Eric Escamilla, who's been on my show a few times in the past, and he has like a running sort of list of guests who come on. And for a while they had a woman called Kat who does her own show called Sci-Fi Party Line, which is also very good. And she hadn't seen an awful lot of old Doctor Who, so they would pick a random story for her to watch, and then she'd come back and say what she thought about it. And I used to love hearing those episodes because it was like you were seeing it through a fresh pair of eyes again, and you were just kind of getting that little bit of joy from hearing them talk about their experience of watching it. And it's really nice. There's
an amazing series of podcasts that I came across quite early on in my podcasting life called Unspoiled.
Oh, I've not heard of that.
So it's kind of, there's a primary host who's in the States, and the kind of concept is that they go through a series or a book or whatever with somebody who knows the material really well and somebody who's never read it before.
Okay.
So, for example, she managed to find somebody who had not seen the Harry Potter movies or read the books, and they did a podcast on like every 2 chapters. And you just get to hear somebody reading it for the first time. So they would talk about, you know, what do you think's happening, or what do you think of this character, or what do you think that might mean, or and Natasha, who's the primary host, is incredibly good at not giving things away mostly. There are 1 or 2 very comedy moments where she accidentally spoils something, but she kind of coaches the other person through discussing, you know, what do you think about that? Or have you, like, what were you? And we're all sitting there screaming at the podcast, being like, oh, she thinks it's this thing. And at various points, the girl who hadn't read Harry Potter gets things so phenomenally almost correct and then talks herself back out of it. And you're like, it's just beautiful. But it's that shared first time through kind of experience. Interestingly, they've just started doing Doctor Who.
I'll have to seek that out.
Yeah, it's good.
So we're going to go for a break, and when we come back, I'm going to be asking Lindsay for her recommendations for our listeners.
Hey, Mr. Beaver, why are you beavering around? Haven't you heard of Cadbury's Caramel? See, as the thick Cadbury's milk chocolate melts with that dreamy caramel, you just have to take things really easy. Looks like somebody else could do with some. Take it easy with Cadbury's Caramel.
And welcome back. So, Lindsay, what have you got for us this time round? What would you like to recommend for our listeners?
So I have been watching a new drama by Russell T Davies on the BBC called Years and Years. Yes. And it's fab. It's also slightly disconcerting. It's a kind of near-future dystopia. So it kind of skips a couple of years ahead at a time, and we kind of see where the UK is heading in this particular iteration, and the world in general. But it is funny and terrifying and poignant all at once, and I think for me that's good drama. So yeah, you might need to be in the right mental space to watch it, but it's certainly worth hunting out. It's not finished yet. I've seen 4 episodes, I think, now. I assume 6. But it's on the iPlayer, so it's definitely worth having a wee nose for.
I've heard it mentioned a few times, and I've seen it come up on the older homepage, and I just haven't got around to it, so I might have to try and make some time for that.
Russell Tovey, I think his name is phenomenal.
Yes, that's right.
He is just so phenomenal. And he's good in everything, so that's not a huge surprise, but definitely worth looking out for.
Okay. Anything else?
I think that's probably the major one. I heard you guys speak about Good Omens. It's wonderful, isn't it? So if you're enjoying that, there's also a really wonderful BBC radio drama adaptation that they did a little while ago of it.
Okay.
And again, the BBC just do wonderful audio drama, I think. And it's definitely worth hunting out. I don't believe it's on the iPlayer currently, which is slightly unfortunate, but I'm sure most good retailers...
It might be on Audible or something
it's
like
also
that.
on Dailymotion. Not that we're suggesting anybody should acquire or listen to these things illegally. But yes, it's definitely worth hunting out if you've enjoyed Good Omens on Amazon.
Okay, excellent. Well, I've got a couple, kind of going from one extreme to the other. The first one is Danger Mouse. My son has become obsessed with that, so I've been watching it too, and it's just great fun. I remember watching it when I was a kid back in the 80s, and so obviously it's all been recast now. So you've got Alexander Armstrong is Danger Mouse.
Wow.
Kevin Eldon is Penfold. Love Kevin Eldon. Do you know him?
I don't think I do.
He's very much one of the sort of regulars in Armando Iannucci's stuff. So if you've seen any of his comedies, he's pretty much ever present. You'll see him. He used to be in Lee and Herring's stuff as well back in the 90s. And who else is in it? There's an American counterpart called Jeopardy Mouse. Who is played by Lena Headey, who's Cersei Lannister from Game of Thrones.
Oh, as you do.
Yeah. And Baron Greenback is played by... I've forgotten his name now, but he actually lives, or he's from the same part of Exeter that I live in. So yeah, it's just a fun series. It very much lives up to what the original did, which is sort of spoofing contemporary stuff, and it's just a lot of fun. And my son adores it, so it's nice to sort of sit down and watch something like that with him, it's got something that works on another level for the adults as well, I think.
Absolutely. So, when I was at uni, my nickname was Penfold.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, it's the coolest character in the whole thing, so you should be
absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, fine. And the other thing, which is not really that similar, is Chernobyl, which has been showing on Sky. Now, I don't really have Sky, but I did get the old viewing pass so that I could watch the final series of Game of Thrones. And that's sort of due to run out in 20 odd days or whatever, so I thought, I'll see what else they've got. And I heard a few people talking about this, and if you're of a particular vintage, you will remember the Chernobyl disaster being on the TV news quite a lot. And I started watching this just after being quite ill, and maybe in hindsight that wasn't the best idea, because you're seeing a lot of people with radiation burns and sickness and that kind of stuff. But it's very well done. I'm not sure how many parts it is. I've seen the first 3 parts. And it's a really good drama. And it shows you just, I don't know how much artistic license is given, but it shows you just how close we came to having a massive, massive nuclear disaster. Not that far away from, certainly where we live. Quite scary, but quite intense viewing.
I think these things are always interesting, and from what I understand, it's been given a lot of credit for being quite accurate, so certainly one to look out for.
Yeah, definitely.
I am a little young to remember it very clearly, but absolutely it was an important, or one of those events that could have changed the world more than it did even.
Yeah, quite. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show, Lindsey. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on.
Not at all. Thank you so much for having me.
Is there anything you'd like to give a plug before you go? Or?
Oh, not really. Like I say, I've been dotting around, so I don't have a permanent presence anywhere. But I believe I have been invited to make an appearance on another podcast that our beloved Suki has an influence on. Suki and John are, I think, starting a new venture.
Ah, yes.
So I might possibly
be on another episode of that, so you never know.
Yeah, well, I'm sure our paths will cross again in the near future.
Yeah, no doubt.
But if anybody wants to find me on the Twitter sphere, you can find me at LHA again. I think it's underscore again.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for coming on. It's been a real pleasure, and maybe you'd like to come back another time and we'll talk about something else.
Oh, absolutely. Any chance to talk, it's usually a positive one in my experience.
Thanks very much.
Not at all, thank you.